welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duville, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who is, as far as I know, the only authority on the origin and design of this sarcophagus.
Tim Longo.
I'm just going to call you the Ankaran from now on.
All right. I was going to try to say that Johann guy's name or whatever that was. That I thought that's maybe who you meant. The guy you save under, in the Abbey or whatever, what that was, the Leopold.
Right.
Because he was an authority on
Johann Andersen, I believe.
Andersen, yeah. Their accents, like for the VO, and oh man, yeah. I mean, I guess it was the time, it was the era, right? So as we talked about on various series for the show, this was sort of like the transition of VO in the industry, like good VO,
Yeah, well, and at this time, I'd say RPGs didn't have a lot of VO. They tended to be exclamatory and sort of very special NPCs, like big story moments would have VO and not be like voiced everywhere, which is, we've alluded to before. We're of course talking about Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, and the sarcophagus, which throughout I thought was going to end up containing a nifagam. It's a very special Vampire the Masquerade thing. I'm sure. Well, you'd have to look in a mirror where in the mirror it says MacGuffin backwards. I didn't think we're ever going to open it. I just thought it was just going to be the stuff that dreams are made of.
Yeah. But I mean, like, oh my God. I mean, it's such the focus. That's why I'm so mixed about the ending. It's such the focus of the game and the story for so long. I mean, why wouldn't I open it? You know what I mean? Exactly. It's like I want to see see what happens, and I guess we're jumping ahead, so we can talk about the ending later, but we'll hit it then. But the one that I got didn't, I thought was a little bit clever about how they handled what ended up being in there, but anyway, yeah. So in this section, we essentially needed to finish Chinatown, right? So there's some stuff to talk about there, and then the end game section.
The one thing you hadn't done. I went and did a bunch of the stuff that you had mentioned, like with Sang in particular, or not Sang, but the other guy with the eyes, Blade Runner references there. Yeah. I did his quest, and I bought a bunch of stuff from Sang with his various. I did have some trinkets on me. I'd totally forgotten that I had them.
Yeah, you probably picked them up and didn't realize.
I did. I just didn't register that they did benefits to me and things like that. Yeah. So the thing that I actually kind of liked from the Chinatown section was the whole thing with the Mandarin.
Mm-hmm.
Right, where he's basically runs a bunch of tests on you as a vampire. That I thought was pretty clever and neat, and didn't over rely. There was a little bit more combat in that section than I really liked, but I love the idea that there was a dude standing in a suit and holding up a crucifix. And then he sees it doesn't do anything and just like freaks out. Just like it's
running in circles. Yeah,
that was some good. There was some good humor there, and also just like some, fairly simple puzzles and things like that. Just sort of like, well, what am I supposed to do to get this to stop parts? A lot of it was very exploitable, but I don't know. It had a lot of charm. Even though I'm not crazy with a lot of the characterization in Chinatown, I did enjoy that section for what it was doing. Well, I need to figure out about you because my employers, want to know more, and I like that a lot.
Yeah, did he remind you of the G-Man from Half-Life?
Yep, a little bit. Right?
Yeah. I mean, so it's like you can see, especially because as we talked about the timing of this game. I mean, quality wise, as far as like the era and the timing compared to Half-Life 2. Quite a bit difference. I feel like this is closer to Half-Life 1 in a lot of ways, but yeah, that whole motif of like this, this
including a tram ride.
Yeah, exactly. That was actually probably too short of a sequence, but it was a fun sequence to have in there. There's a distraction and made you really fear werewolves, which they kind of build up throughout the whole game, and then you finally meet one and there's really nothing you can do about it.
There wasn't a lot I could do about it when I ran into it and it was 30 feet tall and dancing. So I also had that.
Oh,
moment.
Yeah, right. That moment, right. Was it the main werewolf that did that? Or was there, found another werewolf that was just a Easter egg or something?
I think that was, I think what happened was I was supposed to see, I think probably...
You should explain it, by the way.
Right, yeah. So let me explain this. So I had gone to the Lucky Star. I was looking for it was some side quest that had to do with getting a script from somebody who was writing about vampires and the Embrace and the Masquerade and the whole 9 yards, right? And I couldn't find him, and I was looking in all the rooms. I was picking locks. And then I went around to the back of that little area, which is a separate scene. I had just previous to that been in Vesuvius, which was a dance club. That's why I think it was a bug, because I came out to the back of that, and I think probably what I was supposed to be able to do was like look out the back. There was like a back gate or something like that you could see through, and I expect they were going to have a werewolf moment like in near the pier where you see that wolf running above, which turns out to be Beckett, some other vampire.
Yeah.
But instead what I saw was a 30-foot tall, maybe, werewolf model, like the werewolf that happens at the Griffith Observatory we'll get to in a moment. And it was standing there doing the dance with the snapping fingers and like swaying back and forth and snapping its fingers. It was surreal. It was extremely strange. Maybe it was intentional and an Easter egg. It did not look like it because it was doing the dance basically that I'd just been in a club doing. It felt to me like there was just something like that. It just, something went wrong somewhere. Some animation was in a place in memory it wasn't supposed to be. It was pointing. I don't know. I can't really say for sure, but yeah.
Yeah, I was just looking it up really quick. It looks like it is not a bug because others have.
I'm sure others have found it. Like I don't think it was unique to me by any means, but I'm just wondering
if it was an Easter egg or a bug was my question. But yeah, it's hard. Anyway,
it's hard to say. I'm going to look that up while we talk, but because I didn't think to do that. It just kind of came up to me just a moment here.
So I mean. Yeah, so in Chinatown, what you were, I think, about to say as far as like where we left off last time, I was stuck on that one section to get up to the top of the restaurant to talk to Wong Ho, I think his name was. Because remember, I couldn't progress the main quest because the hostess wouldn't let me into the elevator, which I didn't even know there was an elevator. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
So what ended up happening was there on the podium kiosk that the hostess has, there's actually a button there that I didn't see. And so it's a button that just opens the elevator. So yeah. I was like, okay, there's got to be an elevator around here. So I was like trying to see if there's a secret, button or a secret passage or something like that. And so, yeah, so that ended up progressing that way. The interesting thing to me about Chinatown in general is I feel like it wasn't this way in the other areas as much, but maybe they just kind of tricked me into thinking that it was. But the main storyline is even though Chinatown has some subquests, submissions and stuff, and it is seemingly, a connected place like the other locations, the main quest was very linear. The places, like for instance, all the places that you go in the main quest are essentially locked until you can go there through the quest, step in the chain. Because there's, like for instance, there's a side quest from the guy in the store, the little import store, that I had before I did the main quest in the Lotus Blossom location. And that's just locked. Like, he tells you go to the Lotus Blossom and do this thing. I was like, okay. I actually spent a long time trying to get into the Lotus Blossom, but it turns out you can't get in there until you progress the main storyline anyway. Yeah. So I was a little bummed by that with Chinatown in general structurally, because it was so, linear. Like, you can go and walk around and find all these places. It's just they're clearly not available. So it kind of defeats the purpose a little bit.
I think that's sort of a late in the game problem. Just from a development standpoint, that was where they were running out of time and making that all work. I think that is a strength of some of the earlier sections, like we've talked about, and I bet I bet that just takes a lot of work. I mean, I can say that takes a lot of work. Having worked on a RPG,
they were probably
hard to
cutting. They probably were cutting quests and stuff, and cutting parts of the main quest, and just
cutting other ways into
down.
Places.
They're simplifying.
For sure.
Which is
anyway,
a
I did look it up.
Yeah.
I did look it up. It is an Easter egg that is enabled by the patch.
Oh.
So it was not in the original game, but it's in the patch, and apparently it's something I put in a laptop that actually turned it on, which I don't even remember doing. But there was a laptop that maybe it was the password. It says something about a password. I didn't read the whole thing, but it said there was a laptop there, and I must have found that while I was looking in all those rooms, and that's what turned it on.
What I was going to say about the ending, I mean, obviously it's understandable from a development standpoint that they had to simplify and make it more linear. The irony of that, though, which is often, as we both know from games we've worked on, the irony of that is that as the game progresses, you actually, because you become more powerful and you have so many more options as a character because you're leveling up, you actually want the world design to be more elaborate because you have more to do. You have more options as a character,
more verbs.
More verbs, and so it's unfortunate and ironic, right, that as the game goes on in this particular case, and in many cases, they're not alone, that, it ends up being simpler just for shipping purposes, because you actually, as a player, you kind of want it to be the opposite. So, and on the flip side, one thing that they did do well over the course of the game as it went on, I think, or they at least did okay, and they started dabbling with more and more, is they had side quests that actually asked you to go back to the other areas you've been to, so it made the macro world more connected. For instance, the hacking quest, right, had you go back to each of the locations, which I actually didn't finish because I really couldn't figure out what to do in the last step. Did you finish that one?
I did, yes. Which part of it was?
So when I got to the server room and in that last space, I don't know if I missed. Usually they tell you the password in the quest description itself, but maybe he told me a password and I missed it in the email or something. But I couldn't hack into that computer. I didn't have high enough hacking to, I think, hack into the security or something. I don't know. I got into that server room. I shut the power down. I did all that, and I was in there. And on that terminal on the computer, I couldn't. There's progress.
Something in one of the emails which explains that the password, that the guy who's the guy's
backward.
His name backwards.
I thought I tried that though. Huh. Maybe I left. Maybe I left the L off, and was it his name with his first initial, or just his last name?
No, it's just his last name, Schleppen or something like that. Backwards.
I thought I did that, but anyway,
there was a keypad that was weird that I don't remember the password of, but I remember it being a pain to figure out.
The keypad was in an email too, and I found that, or not in an email, but. Yeah, or vice versa. There was the manifesto from that other, guy. But anyway, exactly. So that I didn't finish. So there's only a few. So I did
really like that. There was some really funny stuff in that. There were a lot of gags having to do with the computer, the computer hackers subquest. His handle was Mitnick. I don't know if you remember that from the 90s. I remember it because it was very as a programmer. So Kevin Mitnick was a hacker. He was like a longtime phreaker and hacker, like a real Wargames style kid, who famously wrote, I'm not sure it actually was true, but he wrote a worm or something that, people thought was very close to bring down the stock market. I don't know if you remember that. Like, it was a big deal
vaguely
in the mid 90s. Yeah. So there was that. The network was SchreckNet. Maximilian Schreck is the actor who played Count Orlok in Nosferatu.
Oh, nice.
And at one point there was a password that was Gil Bates, which I thought was hilarious. For of course Bill Gates. Also, Gil was an Arcanum character who had built a lot of technology and regretted it, as I recall. So,
whoa,
that's a name.
Deep cuts.
That's a name they've used before. But so there's just a lot of stuff in there. Like, I feel like whoever was on the Nosferatu stuff really dug deep with some of how all these things were tied together. So it was fun.
Yeah. So then I also didn't go back to do the shark boss because I was having trouble with my melee or my brawler spec. I was having trouble beating that boss, so I kind of decided I would come back to it when I had more tools or I was more leveled up.
Boss.
Maybe you didn't do it. If Shark Boss doesn't ring a bell, then I don't know if you did it because it's pretty unmistakable. So like did you
in the water?
No, that's a land shark. it's
no, I didn't get this one.
Oh shoot. That's not necessarily worth going back for, but so there is a woman in teenager, maybe is more appropriate. She is in across from the import store. There's a little noodle shop, I think. Mm-hmm. Did you go in there? And she's in there, and she's basically like,
you know what? I only went into the back to get Lynn's eyes.
Yeah, so you can go into the front, and there is a teenager in there that is basically like that character from Kill Bill. Kind of schoolgirl kind of like motif.
Oh, yeah.
Also
Go-go.
Not very tastefully done. But anyway, she's Go-go. Yeah, probably. Yeah, I don't remember the name, but in the game, she wasn't very tastefully done. And she has come from, I believe she was Japanese, and she came from Japan to hunt down a demon. And so it's a side quest where you kind of you end up going to the restaurant, the Red Dragon, and he is there. You don't know this at the time, but he is there in human form and is posing as somebody who like does deals for this demon character. And so you kind of talk him into meeting you at the fish market. That's the location that's the farthest, like in the farthest corner. That's again also locked until you do it. You go back, you tell her, and then you both meet there, and then you both end up going in and fighting this dude. He transforms into the demon that she was looking for, which is a big shark with legs and arms. There's a comic character that looks just like, I forget the name of the comic.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean.
That's just basically the head is a big shark, and you have a big fin on the back and stuff. So he and there's actually some like mechanics of like blowing up these canisters in the fish market that freeze him, and then once he's frozen you can do a bunch of damage to him. So there's a little bit more going on there. Very janky boss battle, but he just did so much damage I couldn't beat him. So I don't know, I didn't finish it, so I don't know what the result is. She had a cool sword, so I don't know, maybe she gives you a sword or something. But the other thing I was going to mention, as a total like changing the subject, how did you ever let your Masquerade violation go up at all, or were you pretty good at?
I don't think I ever had a Masquerade violation.
Yeah,
my humanity was generally quite good. I think there was only one time where I lost a humanity point, and I'm not sure even when that was. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as you can imagine, I definitely, I think was frustrated enough at enough points where I would actually, kill humans, and so I had a few points there. But the Masquerade violation was the one that I was most worried about, because if you get all 6 or whatever Masquerade violations, then the game ends. And so I think I only had one left by the end, so obviously I could have reloaded whenever I got that last one. But the thing that I didn't realize, that it actually says in the description when you hover over it, over that bar, or that, that stat there, is the higher you go, the more events start happening to you. And so I was actually, throughout the game, about the last half of the game, there were vampire hunters that would pop up randomly throughout the cities. Wow. And they would come after me. They'd have like crossbows, and they would have like a torch on fire. They light you on fire, and they would just spawn them like in alleyways and stuff, behind you. Yeah. And then you'd hear them yelling. So
sort of like a early precursor to Dishonored has chaos events and things like that. And I feel like there was something similar in Prey, right? Because in Prey you could go, more alien.
Well, yeah, I haven't played that way in Prey, and in Dishonored I never played with high chaos, so I never saw that stuff.
Yeah, I went through the original Dishonored and played both ways and got both the endings. I saw all of that in the original Dishonored. And,
cool.
Yeah, and that's very similar, right? Is that if you play with a high chaos, there's more rats everywhere, and people act differently, and interactions can change a bit. So it's cool to see something like that here. It didn't even occur to me that was going to be going on.
Yeah, no, me neither. I'd forgotten.
Because it's weird. It's such a weird choice. I mean, this is sort of come up before, because that's really just adding more combat. But combat is kind of meaningless in this game, at least in terms of role play, right? I mean, in terms of reward, I should say, in terms of experience. In terms of mechanical experience, the game experience, of course, changes. So, yeah, that's wild to me. Interesting.
Well, I don't think, we can maybe launch into talking about sort of the combat toward the end of the game, but I don't think they thought that the combat was meaningless. I think
fair point.
They clearly thought that it was an important part of the game because of the way they designed the ending.
Well, and that wraps right in with your prior comment about how when you've got more and more things that you can do, towards the end, it's a pretty narrow channel that you've got to go through. I mean, you have some choices that you can make that are dialogue choices. And we'll come back to that because there's an interesting circularity in the game. But yeah, the game turns into a gauntlet.
Yeah.
Which is, which was my frustration because that's the point at which at a certain point in that, I just went and was like, there's got to be cheats for this game, because I'm not going to finish this before we record if there aren't cheats for this game. And certainly with a game that's had this many patches and fan patches and things through the years, it has a God mode. And I fully admit I turned on that God mode.
Me too. I did too. Yeah.
And I needed it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I was going to ask, how many differences there were for you during the gauntlet, specifically with dialogue options, because they definitely give you moments to talk to most of the bosses in those sections. It's, there's a lot of boss battles that happen. But of course, as my character, not only the way I spec'd, but and maybe this was sort of like we had a mail about this where the person that wrote in said, Nosferatu is maybe not the easiest first choice. Yeah, the easiest or the first choice to go for, because obviously everybody treats you differently. But in those conversations, I could never see any options that I would have to talk my way out of anything.
Nor could I. And there's the only part of the game where I felt like it was pretty late, and there was maybe an opportunity for that, but at this point I was getting low on time, was in the Giovanni's. I felt like there was maybe something where I could get this one person promoted to be the head of the family, and maybe she would have owed me something and given me the sarcophagus. Like I thought maybe that was how that could have played out. but not with the Simichi and the Sabat, and not with the any of the rest of it, with the running through the gauntlet with Ming Jiao and her boss fight, and then same with, although there were some places where I could kind of stealth through instead. Mostly it was just fight and fight and fight and fight, and also some fighting.
Well, I think it was fighting, but then the other thing that was frustrating that I can totally see again from the era of the game, and with the first-person shooter influence that this game kind of has as a hybrid game, that it became more of a first-person shooter level design, right? And game, right? It's like, okay, we're going to make these levels that are fairly linear, or, you know, and in some cases sort of weird puzzles they've thrown in that were not, you know, not really well executed. And so it's just that typical ending challenge with any game, especially in this era, of like, how do you mix things up enough at the end to give the player a crescendo or something of some kind? And I would have much rather had, rather than all of this sort of, you know, and this is hindsight 2020, of course, but rather than all of this sort of linear gauntlet, I would have much rather had like one final, you know, dense location that I had to sort of like, you know, cleverly move through like some of the other locations, and just like have, you know, have that be sort of like the final experience that kind of, I feel like, you know, brings everything together, all the different options you have, all the different verbs and stuff. And if you wanted to go through that particular thing in combat, that would be your choice. But in this case, it didn't seem like there were choices, but maybe there's some of the other clans where it's just very different, you know, and you can just walk through this stuff. I don't know. It didn't seem like
I wanted to be able to talk to the sheriff, because it, you know, the gangrel who was always standing next to the Ventru, the Prince LaCroix, you know, and say to him, you know, you don't belong with this guy. Like, you see what he's doing, you know, you know, that this is not cool.
There should be a no combat option for this game.
I felt that way too. Because so much of the game was about the intrigue, and so little of the ending of the game was about intrigue. It was about guns, you know, and you know,
that's a good point.
Because there are points where, you know, like I said, I felt like I was building my power base and things like that, and putting myself in a position to be able to interact, go toe to toe financially, maybe even with some of the other forces in the city, or just kind of carve out my own niche or whatever. And that was all really cool and felt really good, and felt really supportive of the sort of wish fulfillment of, well, I'm going to live forever. There's all this scheming going on. I need to protect myself, and the way I do that is build a power base, you know, and unfortunately Chinatown didn't really have a way for you to continue that after, and nor did really Hollywood. Although there were some side missions that you could sort of take on there that at least made you feel more integrated. I did a bunch of stuff there as well. So, I don't know. Yeah, it was frustrating to have a game that felt like, you know, like we had said in the tabletop, felt like, you know, you could have a conversation that changed everything. And when it gets down to it, you make some dialogue choices, I guess, at the end that do change everything as far as how the ending goes. But then there's just a lot of combat in between. That's I spec'd for Melee too, so it was tough.
Yeah. You know, I was, to your point about sort of like how you could have a crescendo with a political sort of bent to it, which I think is where it needed to go. And, you know, I hope the sequel is thinking about these sorts of things too. But you know, it's almost like you want like a nemesis system, but for politics, you know, where you have this sort of concept of this sort of macro system that's you're sort of pitting different clans and clan leaders against each other, you know, and then
you know, a game that did this really well was Mafia 3.
Oh, really? I didn't play that.
Yeah, so there's you know, you have these lieutenants basically, and you can do things. Basically, you bring these people in, and then you can give each of them different pieces of the crime pie, and you can sort of be playing them against one another, and I think you get benefits from them based on, like, there's some direct mechanical, and that's a game that has tons of shooting, so it doesn't really play into it all the time by any means, but it definitely felt like, we're having a sit down. I'm making a decision about who's going to get this piece of whatever action that we just took over this part of the city, and they're all bidding for why they think they should have it. And it feels very like you don't want to piss off too much this one person versus that other person. But, the benefits of having this person have a greater piece of the pie are really good for your style of play. I mean, there's a lot of interesting stuff there. Great game. You should go check it out. For those listening. Here I wanted to be able to, like, build up some cred and call in a marker. Like, why am I taking down the sheriff? Why isn't it like, I don't know, Nines jumping in through the window or a werewolf? So, right. I don't know, something else, right? So.
Yeah. I mean, I think we're definitely looking at it through modern lens, and I think in the time I can see, I think we've said it already, but I can still see why at the time when you have a game like Half-Life 2 coming out, which is an amazing, stellar shooter, first-person shooter with very minimal story, and then you have this come out at the same time with its sort of density of choice space, and then, Deus Ex was around the same time. What was Deus Ex?
3 years before, maybe, or 4 years before. 2001.
Yeah, so you have examples out there, and then I feel like this is the Deus Ex with adding better sort of RPG dialogue, adventure sort of elements. So the flawed gem in lots of ways, I guess is the good analogy or the good metaphor. But anyway, through a modern lens, easy to pick it apart of its time. Still pretty impressive, even though it's pretty cobbled together. And I think that how rushed the end feels, sort of like, and kind of unpolished the ending feels, it fits right back into that same sort of thing we said about sort of these the ilk of these games and the Obsidian, Interplay, whatever, that whole cadre of folks. Unfortunately, I think it falls into that same category. So whenever you go linear in that, when you have an unpolished...
But it should be said also for its strengths, right? I mean, I think that particular group of developers also really do a good job of that integrated aspect that we've applauded. So it's just... But, endings are hard. And it's hard to pay off on that promise, right? And
Yeah. No, and I'm not trying to say, I think that is why you play this game, and I think that's why it is a much beloved game, is because of that stuff. And then that's why the ending I think is even rougher, right? Because it starts breaking the rules. Yeah. It breaks their whole motif, right? That they're good at they're very good at the rest of it, and endings are hard, and leaning into what they're good at the rest of it would have been fun, and they keep progressing, right? They're still making games, and they're iterating, I'm sure. So
for sure.
But the integrated stuff, the hybrid stuff is quite good, and I think it's the sort of, I wish I had played this game at the time when it had come out, because I'd heard about it, and I obviously had played Vampire tabletop, and so I should have probably played it. I don't really remember why. Probably I was playing Half-Life 2 or something, or we were shipping more.
You were a little busy in November 2004.
As
I recall. It was a tough month for you.
Yeah. So, there's plenty of reasons, but I do wish I would have played it within that era, because I too would have been very impressed with it, design-wise. I think that they took a lot of chances, and they did a lot of things that nobody else had done before at that time. And I think it was very worthy of playing for the podcast in that regard.
Yeah, for sure. I totally agree. Let's talk about boss fights. You mentioned Jabberjaw, and there's probably some others. Jabberjaw is the shark cartoon character I thought of, but that meant you might just be mean the street sharks. That might be the other one you're thinking of.
I don't remember. I just remember the visual. No, actually, there's one of the There's a member of the Suicide Squad the modern day Suicide Squad that is a shark man. I think it has a head of a shark. In the comic, he might, they might be in the sequel movie too coming out. But anyway, it's a hilarious, that's the whole Suicide Squad's thing. They're the
King Shark, apparently.
King Shark, yeah, they're the outcasts, right? Anyway, yeah. So I want to talk about the Ming Zhao specifically boss fight because they definitely, I think I totally applaud them for going after bosses throughout the game. I just think that there's enough things working against that being, at least it might have been my spec. Maybe again, it has more to do with the way that I had to fight these bosses, because with ranged gunplay, it might have actually been better. But the way that I was doing it, the signaling and the level design and the room design for the bosses typically didn't really make the game shine. It actually worked against what the game was good at in the boss design. And the reason I want to talk about Ming Zhao specifically, I think it's a good example of sort of like discouraging you to do the thing you need to do, at least the way that I read it, because I had to turn on God mode too. So then I got to really see the mechanics of it. And, as you knock the tentacles off, and then you see one of them turn into a second monster, that signals to you that you're just like, okay, well, I better kill the little guys before they turn into monsters, because I don't want that to happen. But in God mode, once you start really wailing and you take all the tentacles, you cut all the tentacles off, or punch them off in my case, literally punching tentacles off of this thing. It seemed to be the fastest way to get it, to do damage to it. And only one of the little guys will turn into a big one. So it's not like all of the tentacles will turn into monsters. That obviously would have been ridiculous for that room. So in a way, you actually don't want to kill.
They'll turn into them one at a time.
As you kill them, though, if you don't kill any of them,
you have to kill one. Right. If one turns into a bigger one.
Yeah, there's a finite number of tentacles.
Right. Exactly.
Basically, and they're either in one additional monster form, they're little critter forms, or they're on her body. And so, if you don't want her to regenerate them on her body, then you don't want to kill any of them. Right. You know what I mean? But it's signaling to you, oh, no, you better kill. I didn't know this until I went to God mode, right? It's signaling you that, oh, if you let one survive, a little guy survive for too long, then they'll turn into a big one, and that obviously is a negative reinforcement. And so I was like, okay, I better kill these right away. But then she regenerates as soon as you kill it, very quickly. So it just was counterintuitive for me, on sort of like maybe the best way to do it, because the little guys, once they're off and they're kind of hiding, they can't attack. They don't do anything to you. So it's actually sort of better once you take all the tentacles off of the main one. The only attack she really does is this charge attack.
Right. Which seems like it stuns you, and it probably does some damage if you don't have God mode on. Yeah.
Yeah, it does. It does. And I played her probably 30 times before I turned God mode on. So I did a lot of experimenting without God mode on, and that's the best attack to have against you. But it's just interesting, how to. I would love, not that they would even have this probably, but I would love to see the statistics of people who had finished these final bosses legitimately in the day. At least with my spec, I don't think it's. I really don't, because you can only hold 5.
Elder Vitae.
Elder Vitae, yeah. So, those I definitely wouldn't have been enough, even with the other, because the other ones at that point don't really give you enough blood to really make a difference. And there are some exploity things you can kind of circle strafe and kind of avoid it, but you got to be really good or really lucky, because the clarity of collision and attacks and stuff is just not there. So I don't really wasn't sure how to dodge. So Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I couldn't figure. I mean,
low.
I was melee as well, and I had a katana at that point. I was like, oh, perfect. I'm cutting through this fleshy thing, but oh no, it was not perfect. It was far from perfect, and I was similarly getting kind of worked. And I was trying to find places to hide so I could just heal up, but there's no. I mean, there's a bunch of alcoves in there, but she could get you in any of them. So, you know, it was just really, really rough. It was a very, very difficult sort of boss fight. I was frustrated multiple times, and then you go from there. Finally, defeat her. You basically go from there to, and I also had exploited the Samichi. I had not turned on God mode, but I had found a place where the pathing got stuck and just took advantage of that, just like I would do in any game from the period. I can remember doing that in other games. It's like, oh, I found a place where they can't figure out how to get to me, so I'm good here. I mean, Fallout 3 had that problem even, I think. Some animals couldn't get to you if you were up like on rocks and stuff. Something we fixed in Skyrim. But yeah, I mean, it's the problems are hard, right? I mean, it's difficult to write an all-purpose AI that's just going to get you everywhere, no matter what the designers want to do with an environment.
Sure.
For example.
Yeah.
So it's not a fault, but it's just the same time I was like, yep, I will take this win. I'm not proud.
yeah, for
you
sure.
know, and the same thing here. I was like, you know what? That's what God mode's in there for. I'm good with it. I want to get to the end of this game, and I am generally glad that I did. I liked. We talked in pre-show about is I liked how the game came around circularly back to
Smiling Jack,
the cabbie. Smiling Jack, and then the cabbie who asks you a bunch of questions, basically to determine what ending you're going to face.
Oh wait, let me ask you a question really quick.
Yeah.
Is that the cabbie that you had throughout the game?
Yes.
Oh, because I've never seen him before.
Right. You haven't seen him, but he's always my cabbie.
So I thought he was some new, like, mysterious character that I was supposed to know about. But for you, it was this reoccurring character. So I actually think tonally that's quite a big difference for me, because I actually put a lot more weight on him than maybe he deserved, because I was like, ooh, who's this guy? He's my final new character. You know what I mean? Like my final new character who's asking me really interesting questions. And I was like, oh, who's this guy? But you've been seeing him the whole time. And that's weird. That's interesting. I mean, I don't know how you would do it otherwise, but yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, and I think he's sort of he's also sort of signaled to maybe be Cain.
Yeah, I could see that.
Which was the big change at the end. He's the only he's a vampire, but you can see him in the mirror, in the cab. Like, so there's something different about him. So there's there's some stuff going on.
That would be neat. That would be neat. If I had played with the non-Nosferatu character and you kind of have a revelation that the cabbie you've been using this whole time is actually Cain. Cool.
Yeah, I mean, he might also be the person who gave you who sent you the emails about chess. I'm not.
Yeah, I never really fully, like, that was one thing that I never got. I never got sort of a resolution on. I don't really know what that was all about.
Yeah, I don't know if that was him or not, because I can't imagine it's. I can't imagine it's Jack, because he seems so. It seems antithetical to his character to be kind of into tech and to be sending you email. On the other hand, it is sort of stuff that Jack is interested in as far as you goes, and like having all the, like, I could see it being Jack. I don't know. So there was a lot kind of going on there, but I did really like that he basically asks you a bunch of questions, and by your answers, which for me were all pretty strange, it sort of determines what you're going to do. And for me, for both of us, I guess it turned out, I guess you're going to go your own way. You're going to be an individual.
Yeah, I was just fed up with everybody. You know, I was just
I was too, but I'd been thinking I would go with the Anarchs, but then I was up on top of the hill there at the Griffith Observatory, which was a decent scene. We should probably briefly talk about that as well. But But then Nines got taken out by a werewolf. I'm like, well, he's not so bad either. Like, that's just going to be another problem with those people, with the Anarchs in charge. Like, clearly they're on the losing end. Maybe I should just be the boss, was basically my thinking. Maybe I should be in charge. That's what should happen.
So I was looking up the cab driver really quick, and it does say it's strongly implied that everyone feels like he may be Cain. Yeah. Just in the sort of fan wiki stuff. So others had come to that conclusion. I missed it. I just didn't. Yeah, I was, I think, rushing at that. And I had no connection with him too. I got to the same.
Also, he reminded me visually of, I don't know, like there's maybe a comic book character with the glasses. He made me think of, like Randall Flagg from The Shining, sort of character. Like he had this, I don't know, it's an iconic kind of look, the mirror shades. Sort of reminds me of, there's a character who, like, and this might be like a Hellraiser or Clive Barker sort of thing, where he pulls down the glasses and then he's got mouths in the eyes.
There's a Sandman character that's the Corsican.
Sandman. The Corsican, that's who I'm thinking of.
Yeah.
So he also reminded me of that. Thank you. I'm glad you knew that, because I was having a hard time coming up with that one.
That is an amazing villain. That Corsican is one of the most amazing characters and villains in any. Yeah, that's Sandman. Sandman goodness for all of those 90s comic readers out there.
Yeah, sure. Well, and that would fit in with this time as well. So anyway,
for sure. Yep. Yeah, I went the same direction, as far as like I was fed up and kind of essentially decided to go. I wasn't necessarily going toward the way I was role playing it in my head when I was answering questions. I wasn't going toward I'm going to take over. It was more like I'm just going to go on my own and forget everyone else and just kind of revolt against all of it, And I also turned into much more of a jerk across because I think I got so fed up. Like I never give, in RPGs like this, when they give the option, I never give the negative answers where I'm really like talking back to characters, because I feel like often when you do that, it closes options down. I kind of do it. I don't do it for mechanical reasons, but here I was so pissed at everybody that I was like cussing at them and like trying to cut them off, and it was just so against type.
So it was like your D&D character. I get it. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Anyway. So maybe we should talk about the ending and then kind of close down. Because I mean, there's a few different things that can happen that you looked up, but
I looked up the endings. But so for us, we basically fought our way all the way up to the top of the tower, which I assume you got up there through your normal way, through the sewers.
So in the sort of what is it, storage area where the freight elevator is, there was always a stairs that go up to the lobby that had a locked door. I didn't know it went to the lobby. And so at the end, the sewers were inaccessible. They had basically spawned me in the room. The sewers were inaccessible and the freight elevator was inaccessible. So then I was like, well, all I could do is go into the lobby. Yeah. So ended up
fight a bunch of cops.
Yeah.
Have your Matrix moment and then take the elevator up. Yeah. I mean, it was just room upon room upon room of enemies, some of which you could get behind and stealth kill. I was so happy to be God mode by then because I was just chewing through everything. Which was, I did turn it off for that, for all of the non-boss stuff. I turned God mode off. No, nope, I didn't. At that point, I was like, I'm good.
Yeah, that's fair.
Like I said, I mean, I just was never into the combat, so it was kind of like, well, this is just filler for me. Like, this is not. Which, again, I get for business reasons too, right? I mean, that's a thing that just happens. But anyway, we finally get up, and for us, we had a conversation with the prince, and basically, like, use a weapon that's on the table to, like, slice him up a bit, and then open the sarcophagus ourselves. despite the fact that people have warned us off. And that's when we discover that it's filled with C4 from Smiling Jack.
yeah. It's pretty poetic. Yeah, it was fun, and then after that we see what? After
you see Jack watching from across the river or something like that. Probably didn't even know what hit him, he says, something like that. And he's got the mummy that was originally in the sarcophagus sitting there with him in a lawn chair. It's
pretty funny moment. Yeah, pretty funny moment. And I think you said it in pre-show. I think you put it well. It's sort of like we got what we deserved in a way.
Yep.
By that point.
Yeah, we sure did. Yeah, I was chasing power, and I should have been allying myself with Jack, which I kind of wanted to do. I did like that he showed up at the observatory to take us away. It was nice to see that character again. The other thing, so I went and looked up the other endings. And the other ways that can end is you can walk away, you can leave the key with LaCroix, and then just he blows up, and you kind of go your own way when you get down to the street. Nines comes up and says, "Hey, do you want to join us?" And you give him the finger and walk away. My favorite ending was if you ally yourself with the Kwai-Jin or Kwai-Jai, whatever, the Asian vampires.
Yeah, I thought it was Kwai-Jin, but maybe not.
The Kwai-Jin, I think you're right. Yeah,
or Quan-Jin. Yeah. Anyway, go ahead.
She shows up as you're about to open the sarcophagus, and you've cut up the prince, and he says, "No, you've turned him. She's gonna kill you anyway," and that sort of thing. And they kill the prince. They take the sarcophagus, and she surrounds you with gunmen, and she says, "I'm not going to kill you because of the service you've done me," or something like that. And it shows then a scene at sea with her on a boat, and they tip the sarcophagus over the side of the boat and into the ocean. And as it tips over, it's well shot. It's a well framed shot. You see that you have been attached to the sarcophagus. You've been tied down to the sarcophagus. So she's not going to kill you. She's just going to make you wish you were dead, which was a very fitting sort of pulpy, pulp, Orientalism sort of thing. But I thought that was an excellent end. And then what's left?
If you join LaCroix, is that that's an option?
If you join LaCroix, right, he'll open the sarcophagus instead. Oh, right, the Blood Mage is the one I was thinking of. If you join with LaCroix, he'll open it instead. You'll get the C4. If you walk away, he gets the C4 alone. And of course, if you open it, you see the C4, and you blow up. So there's a bunch of kind of variations on a theme. The final one is if you get a new primogen for the city, a new prince, which is the mage in sort of the nice clothes, who's either a Toreador or a Tremere. I'm not sure which. And I think maybe Toreador, but I don't know. I can't remember what they are. Somebody will know. He shows up there, and they basically, now that the sheriff has dealt with the big gangrel, he basically takes it, and you get a Raiders of the Lost Ark style sarcophagus being put in a warehouse, and all the lights going out and nobody opening it, sort of ending. So a lot of variety there. All of them pretty good. Like, those are all pretty good endings. So
true to form for them, right?
Yep.
I mean, we talked about this with Fallout 1, right? It's like, and that's sort of part of their legacy is that sort of concept. So it really, I really shouldn't, but it really makes me want to go back. I don't think I ever finished Arcanum. I think I got quite a ways in, but I'm really interested to know what that game becomes. But I'll never do it. But I like that team and what they put together,
for sure.
Yeah.
I would, I'm not sure I finished Arcanum either. I got pretty far though, because I'm pretty sure that Gil Bates character is pretty late in the game. I could be wrong though. I really don't remember. It's been so. I mean, that's like 2001 or 2 or something. It's been forever since.
Yeah.
But yeah, maybe someday.
But it felt, I think as far as like the very ending, other than the sort of gauntlet that I think just too extended. I'm actually fine with gauntlets, by the way. Like I think they had their place. I just think this one was too long, too extended.
Well, the other thing is I don't think the systems in this support it, right? I mean, it's in particular the health, right? The health model is so slow to recharge that it just feels really grindy because after any given fight, you might have to just sit there and wait because you don't have a lot of blood left. You're trying to conserve it for something that's really difficult. And so you just have these downtimes. I mean, for me, until I turned God mode on, I would just stop and take my phone and play an app and then come back to it in a few minutes when my blood had come back. Yeah. And that's, if I mean, I would have done that at the time. I would have had a book open on the desk next to me while I was playing, and that would have been just how I finished the game.
I wonder, so as for on the specking side of how we finished the game, did you end up? I assume you ended up with just a lot of points you never used.
I actually, when I got towards the end, I put a lot more into the melee because I was in those gauntlets and I'd like to make this easier, so let me just put a bunch of points in. It's clear there's not much left, and I was glad I had them at different points because I could experiment. But at this point, I basically put a bunch into melee, and then as I got really at the end with the fight with the sheriff, I put a bunch into the ranged so that I could shoot him out of the sky, right? Because that was the only way I could figure out to kill that boss.
Did you notice a difference when you did that for range?
I just was doing more points and it was easier to aim.
Okay.
So I had an assault rifle that without the points took forever to zoom in and was very unstable. And if I zoomed, it had an alt fire, which was tab. You get close up, but it would jitter so much that I couldn't actually get a beat on him in zoomed mode. So those things helped.
Yeah. So I ended up, let's see, other than my sneaking around, which I ended up putting a fair amount in just to kind of, because that was sort of the character I wanted. So, lockpicking and computer stuff and sneak. By the end, I ended up with a maxed out strength, dexterity, and stamina.
Nice.
And brawler or whatever, hand to hand, punching and dodge, because I was trying to take more be able to take more damage and do more damage with my fists. And then the discipline that I doubled down on was actually potence. And so I turned that on and then just do a lot of damage with my fists.
I actually bumped up my hallucination to be able to make enemies go berserk on one another.
Oh, I didn't even know that was a thing.
Yeah, you didn't have that. The Malkavians have that as their special
That sounds
spell.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah, that was kind of fun. I did that a lot in the lead up to Ming Zhao, but then I put on God mode. I would have done that a lot towards the end. With all the gunfighters, I would have been just making one of them shoot all his buddies, and then I think what happens when it runs out, they die besides, so you're not even left with whoever was doing the shooting. So you take a couple characters, they do all the fighting for you. You have to be able to get close enough to do it, but that was pretty useful. And I would have gone, I had a bunch of blood going into that that I had bought but at the blood bank, but I would, if I were still trying to play the game at that point without God mode, I would have gone and got more blood and continued to use that method. That was pretty fun to do. It wouldn't have helped with the sheriff bat form by any means, and so there was just limits. But it was cool. It was neat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's they definitely they had their work cut out for them because of the way that the different clans and specking and stuff, thinking if you were somebody who say went all conversation and maybe intelligence and research and stuff, you were kind of the brainiac, and you get to some of this ending stuff, it seems like it might be, unless you really, there are some dialogue options that pop up or something. But like I wouldn't think that would be the case for both Ming Zhao and the sheriff. So it's like those would be very frustrating battles, I would think. But they must have some balancing thing. It's just as far as like the matrix of design for that is very admirable to go after it, you know. So everyone's playthrough is going to be pretty unique. So, and I can see why people, as we've said before, play this game multiple times. So I definitely am intrigued to know. I probably won't do it, but maybe I'll watch a video or something to see how the other playthroughs go, because it seems like very, very different things can happen.
For sure. Well, why don't we've gotten to an hour, so we should probably take a quick break and then come back and do our takeaways and talk about it next time.
Sounds good.
Welcome back from the break. We're at the end of a series, so of course we have to do our takeaways, and then don't let me forget, I have to do my book recommendation at the end.
Right,
because I have one of those for this time.
Anne Rice's The Vampire Lestat.
It is Lestat. Yeah,
Lestat.
it is not. No, it's Tom Cruise as Lestat. Is my
okay. Twilight by. What's her name?
Myers, Stephanie Myers.
Yeah, Stephanie Myers. Don't get my wife started on that thing.
I will not. I know better.
Dracula. I'm just gonna guess.
Yep, you're not gonna guess. You will not have heard of this book.
True Blood.
I guarantee you will not have heard of this book or maybe even this author. So
okay,
I'm gonna stump you.
Cool.
You can keep guessing. So it's not any of those. Anyway.
Yeah.
Let's turn to takeaways. Of course, at the end of any series, we like to do a few takeaways, sort of things that we would adapt to our own work, or things that we think the industry learned or we learned or whatever to take away from a particular game. And as usual, sir, I start with you.
I'm one of mine. I'm going to actually combine two into one because they're very closely related, and also will be no surprise for anyone who's listened to the whole series. I'm just calling it the importance of connected world and density and level design. Sounds like a GDC talk or something. Not intended. And I think I literally talked about this the first episode, and every episode of the series, with the health clinic being the sort of best sort of microcosmic example, and then I think it just kind of gets better over the course of the game from there. And I just we used examples like taking aspects of Deus Ex style games and putting it into an RPG setting, an adventure game setting. And once you really get to know each of the districts and kind of are bouncing between them, based on the missions you're doing or the quest you're doing or the side quests or whatever, it's just very cool to be doing that. And I think that they, as we talked about, as far as Troika goes as a company, though maybe they hired people who had done 3D level design before to join up, of course. But as a company, this was their first 3D game, and it just is impressive that they kind of went for it and kind of went so far with having so many different things, in a lot of the spaces. Even some of the one-offs had some of that going on too, like the haunted hotel and stuff. They were dabbling with some of it, though those tended to be a lot more linear. But yeah, things like the spaces, like the clinic, and trying to think of some other good examples from specific buildings. But generally, the Santa Monica overall, I think, is a great example. So that's my first one. It made it very worthwhile for me to play the game because of that one choice.
Yeah, for me, I mean, I would say my related one to that, and I won't belabor it, is just the general quest connectedness. How characters or locations were reused to sort of to do all of that. In a related sort of way, and not being a person who's ever played the Vampire the Masquerade or any of those White Wolf games, it felt like from the outside this really serviced the wish fulfillment and that particular fantasy world for almost all of the game. This episode's discussions notwithstanding, it felt like it brought in tons of stuff, including ghosts, werewolves, all the different factions, and some very weird stuff with all of that, including how the Quijin would transform and the Simichi. And I mean, just it was much broader than I expected. I had known about sort of the intrigue, and had played the card game, and so I had that sense as well. But the card game is really all Camarilla, as I recall, and I think that's kind of the cornerstone of that game. And this was just really felt like it leaned into all of that. So it's all there, and I think that really was a real strength for me. I didn't expect it to be as much as it was. I mean, we talked a lot about with the character creation and feeling like, oh, there's really 7 games, here in terms of how you play, which is with a first person RPG. That's kind of, that's a high bar, because certainly this was also a team that was used to more party based RPGs where you're getting a feel for all of what the thing can do from a single playthrough because you have a party of characters who can cover the gamut of experience that you might have. So it was really quite something, and I'm glad that I went back and played as a Malkavian because that even gave it further flavor. Really strong from that standpoint.
Yeah, I definitely, like I said, I have that usual inkling I have at the end of any of our games where I want to go and explore some specific thing differently. But I'd love, that inkling in this case, which I will not end up doing, is finding the most different clan from the Nosferatu. I don't know if it would be Malkavian, but maybe Tremere or something like that. Something that's very, talky. And just, play through that way just to see how different it is. Because I think the Nosferatu side of things definitely was quite different for me, as we talked about throughout the series. So, yeah, I mean, I think for my second one, that no surprise, I think, with this game, that I think all of our takeaways are going to be the same in most ways. I basically was focusing on the world building aspects of the game, and it basically is what you just said with yours. So I think a lot of our takeaways may be very interconnected, but I definitely appreciated that it felt like the only thing I'd add that maybe you didn't mention there is that it still felt like an RPG-ish of the era, similar to other games, but because they did such a good job at world building the White Wolf world, it felt unique and different, because it was not fantasy, it was not sci-fi, it was not post-apocalyptic, it was modern day, White Wolf, vampires, World of Darkness stuff. And that went a long way. And like you just said, it was sort of the best of, it was like literally they had cameos from nearly every sort of group you'd want in a game like this. And each of those in the White Wolf, having been a White Wolf player in the White Wolf universe, each of those cameos could have been their own game.
Right.
The werewolf game, a ghost game, a mummy game, whatever. The only bummer for me, which I can totally see why they didn't, unless I just didn't find it, but I don't think it would be the case. The irony is that the tabletop that I played the most of White Wolf was actually Mage, which is an offshoot, another whole nother category. And that's where basically you have humans who are mages, still in White Wolf, but it's not the vampire. And they didn't really have any mages in this game. So that was one personal bummer that I wanted to see. But as far as everything else, like it felt like I was in the White Wolf world, you know, and that was clearly a focus for them. So yeah, agree on that one.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I guess the thing that I had also made as kind of a sub point was that it really made your character matter, you know, and had something for everyone, like whatever clan you wanted to play.
Yeah, that's my last one.
Yeah. The other positive one as I sometimes do, I have one that's negative, but that should be pretty obvious from this episode. But being a game that defied genre, and it really, although it is an RPG and it feels like an RPG in a lot of mechanical ways, it doesn't just feel like an RPG. We talked a lot about, I think last episode about, or maybe the episode before, about how adventure gamey it feels at points, and you know, the dialogue options are a RPG staple, but here they feel like different ways to unlock a step of a quest. You know, and I say quest, but it's also just unlock the next part of the story, right? So in an adventure game sort of way, and it doesn't feel shoehorned into an RPG genre. I think part of that is also the modern setting that also just doesn't feel like an RPG thing, and of course the engine, which is, you know, more of a shooter focused engine, obviously. So there's a lot of things I think that contribute to that feel, but it definitely it feels like an early example of getting out of genre ruts, or you know, really trying to expand out what an RPG can be. And I think that's really great, and to the game's credit, and is, you know, something I think we see everywhere. We see RPGs bleed into a lot of other genres now, especially with sort of just general progression mechanics and things like that. But this does it in a really rich storytelling way, which I think pulls forward a lot of adventure game stuff, without having specific locks and keys, right? Specific, you know, figure out this puzzle exactly this way kind of stuff. So it really works really, really well from that standpoint for me. And it doesn't feel like a specific genre, even though it is clearly RPG influenced. So
yeah, I definitely don't envy doing a sequel on this game in a modern day sense, because there's a lot going on here, and you probably would really need to pick and choose certain aspects to focus on, because if you tried to actually emulate everything that they did in this game for a modern audience, it's a lot. That's a lot. You know, they just have a lot of stuff going on. You could get away with more. You could, you know, back then, there's, you know, there are a lot more forgiving fidelity, and just like, you know, kind of like mushing things together was a lot more acceptable. But, you know, I think these days you got to really, and again, we mentioned it, I think a couple episodes ago, but that's what's going to be really fascinating about Cyberpunk specifically, because it's I think right in the same wheelhouse, and so I guess we will see soon.
Well, you will see soon.
I will see soon.
I will see someday, probably.
Yeah, I will. Yeah. Well, the world will see soon. I don't know if I'll get to it right away, but I probably will. I'm looking forward to something like that. My last one is really one you already hit too, and it really focuses around them doubling down on clan options and variety there, and really making sure that each one seemed to have its own version of the game, so to speak, or at least some, not full version, but at least a layer that was very unique to them and accommodated them. And, you know, different RPGs do that to some degree, but usually even in fantasy RPGs, it's not too drastically different. But here, I feel like that was a pillar for them, and a takeaway of, like, for me, of just how far they went with that. And you know, the interesting thing when you compare it to sort of like a fantasy game where you have whatever elves and dwarves and humans, and those groups are fairly different in and of themselves, you know, but here everybody's a vampire and everyone is sort of humanoid and similar-ish, you know, and so the characterizations of those, and the sort of motif of each of them ends up being sort of the focal point. And so integrating that into an RPG would be fairly different and challenging. And is the right goal, because like we talked about with the tabletop, the whole intrigue and politics side of, and faction, pitting factions against each other is really the bread and butter of this, of Vampire the Masquerade. And so it was definitely the right way to go, but super bold as well to go that far with each of them.
Yeah, totally agree. My cautionary takeaway, I guess, is the combat stuff. We talked a lot about it this time. I feel like this is a game where I feel really kind of cool and leaning into wish fulfillment until I have to fight, and then I feel terrible most of the time. Yeah. And I think that's really unfortunate. I would much rather everything be like single hit kills, and just feel like, yeah, I'm sure it's a lot of cannon fodder, but I'm just ripping through it, right? Because I'm a vampire, man. Back off, right? I mean, I don't think you could have done that. So I don't really, knock them too much for that, because I certainly understand the time, right? I was still at LucasArts at the time. Like, I totally get. I was still early in my career. I totally get how you get to that. Like, so I really am not slighting them from the choice that they made. I just think I'm glad that we're able to make different choices now. So yeah, and especially towards the end of the game. I mean, I was glad to have God mode. Thank goodness. If you're gonna have combat and just add a bunch of it in later, please put in the God mode. I'll also do that. I'll also say that because it was never the thing that was interesting to me in the game, and it really worked against my my enjoyment a lot of the time. I was like, oh, now I've got to fight a bunch of things underneath the city. Some of the boss fights were fine. I mean, I think they were not always well considered. We covered that as well, but I liked the Samichi one, the first one, and there were sections I liked. I kind of thought the combat was fun and cool, even if it wasn't well supported. I liked fighting my way down through all the Sabbat guys to finally get to the Samichi again. I didn't particularly care for that fight itself, but it was an interesting area. So I don't know. I mean, there's good and bad with all of it, but it is really a thing where where I just a cautionary thing, like you said, you used to be able to get away with this sort of thing a lot more than you can now. And I think that would be hard to do today, to have combat that didn't I think you'd get ripped up by fans. So there's expectations are a lot higher, I guess. And maybe that's kind of my modern lens looking at it that way, but a thing to be aware of. So,
but I mean, part of the point of this podcast too is to see where some of the legacy and influences from the past have come from. So this game definitely, I can see it having influence on modern games and future games, even ones that these developers are making today. So right. So its impact is definitely seems like it was felt, and now that I've played it, I can see it being clearly. It's clear how and why it would have had an impact. So what about your book, this mysterious book?
Oh, right. Yeah. So Brett's book recommendation for a vampire game. I read this one back in, I don't remember if we read all of it. I think we just read one chapter of it. It's a collection of, I guess you'd call it a novel, even though it's presented as sort of episodes in a story of a cycle of a vampire's life. And it's called The Vampire Tapestry. It's by an author named Suzy Charnas, Charnas. I believe it's still in print. It is, if not, check your local library. It's a really interesting book. It covers sort of a vampire waking up, I guess in the 80s. I think it was published in the mid 80s, and waking up from sort of torpor, going through a cycle of kind of coming back to itself, figuring out where it is in the world, going through a number of experiences, and actually over that period of time, wrestling more with sort of intellectual questions, and then finally deciding to retreat from the world again and go into torpor again for a period of time, which is just part of the life cycle of this type of vampire in the story, which is not the sort of supernatural vampire that we see portrayed normally in so many other books. It's a super interesting read. and really, I don't know. It's really, there's some really, really thrilling things in it that pair up well with sort of what's going on in the story. There's in particular a section where he's hearing an opera for the first time, I think.
Wow.
In the I think it's like an outdoor performance, like in the desert. I think he's near New Mexico or something, in New Mexico or something, and it's outdoors, and it's really, really I think it's Carmen maybe. And it's just a fantastic chapter. And I remember, I mean, it's been years since I read it. But I really, really recommend it. There's also a chapter where he is having a conversation with a psychiatrist. That's also, or a series of conversations maybe with a psychiatrist. It's really interesting. So it's some great stuff in it. Very different from other vampire literature I've read, and I have read a lot of it, though not any Twilight. So I recommend it. That again is the Vampire Tapestry, and it's by Suzy. I think her middle name is McKee. I think she might go by Suzy McKee Charnas. Yeah, you're looking it up. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I was like, she had a middle name, and before I was like, is it Mary? And it finally came to me. It's Suzy McKee Charnas. So
yep. Interesting. That's cool. Yeah, I never heard of it, and that seems very different. And we need different vampire fiction out there for sure.
For sure. It is. It's one of the most unique ones I've ever read, and I've read a lot of vampire stuff in my years. I also thought about Chelsea Quinn Yarbro, who wrote a whole series about like this historical vampire. There's a whole bunch of books in that series, also pretty good. But that's the one that has lasted with me. If I only ever read one vampire book, again, it would be that. It would be the Charnas. So check it out. Okay, well, that is our show. We didn't have any reviews or email this time. You can shoot those to devgameclub@gmail.com, and of course reviews via the podcast app or whatever podcast app you use on your device of choice, whatever you're listening to us in now. If we don't read it on the show, just let us know and point us where we can find it or mail it in, singing or otherwise. We love to read those. We love to get everyone. We treasure them. We don't do any kind of advertising, obviously, for this show, so we're purely a word-of-mouth operation, and we appreciate you letting folks know. We have talked about our next game. We are trying to nail down an interview or possibly two for this one. It's a scheduling thing, so we may be starting a new game next week, or we may be having an interview. We will let you know. Maybe we'll just surprise you next week. Normally I'd say we'll put it on the Twitter, but maybe we'll just surprise you.
That'd be a first, right?
Why not?
You just start listening and you're like, what's it going to be? It's going to be a
November surprise, as it
Maybe
were.
we should do that every time, and they never know. But I guess then they can't really play along with. I don't know who plays along. Well, I guess some people do because we have people write in about it, but I'm sure it's a small number. But, you could always catch up. But.
I will say this next one that we're playing is one that a lot of people have played. So I think that it is one that people are more likely to have played in the past, and so it won't be a huge deal to. And we won't play a ton of it to start because it's the first episode. So. But yeah, we'll talk about that, and you'll see. You can find us on the web at devgameclub.com or on Twitter at devgameclub, where you can also find my co-host at
Tim Longo Jr. with the JR at the end.
And our intro and outro music was written and performed by Kirk Hamilton and commissioned by friend of the cast, Aaron Evers. Have fun talking with your psychiatrist about being a vampire this week, and good night.
Good night.